Hey, it's Keith from Outlaw Speed Shop, and in this episode we're going to talk about wheels, more specifically wheel swaps. And in this episode I'm going to show you a couple ways. I have this casting, and I've taken the liberty of drilling it out. I actually stripped it. I was going to do something with it, and then it kind of fell by the wayside like most of my projects. But it's a good base to get started with. So most commonly, you'll run across plastic bases. These are probably the easiest to work with as opposed to the metal bases. And you'll notice that most cars have a different width of where the wheels mount. The rear on this particular casting is fairly narrow, whereas the front is wider. Now, when it's together, of course I picked the cast, there we go. You can see how the wheels sit. Okay, they sit flush with the step side fenders on the back, and they sit flush, pretty flush on the front. Now, the diameter of these wheels are the same. The width is different. You can see the back ones are different than the front. So those are all things you kind of have to pay attention to depending upon what you want to do with your casting. So for example, if you want to lower your truck or car or whatever it is you're working on, and you want this sitting up, you're going to run into a few problems, mainly the thickness of the casting from here to here. You might have to grind out here and take the thickness down. You may have to take some out of the top, again, depending upon how low you want to go. And the same thing on the back. And if, for example, you wanted really fat tires on the back, fatter than what these are, now you're running into a metal casting part, not just an interior piece that you have to grind away from. So you have to take all that into consideration when you're deciding what tires you want and what stance you want. So let's look at some of the tools and parts that I will be using in this quick video. Okay, so to measure, you can use either a micrometer or a caliper or a steel rule, any kind of ruler that you have. Now, I know this is kind of ironic coming from me, who doesn't really measure much. I kind of wing it as I go, but this does actually help. Mainly when you're trying to figure out what you have if you're going to customize axles because you're trying to drop things. So, for example, here I can measure the back, and just for visual purposes, you can see the difference in the front is considerable. So that does help, especially when you're measuring axle tubes. So we'll get into axle tubes after. So the first step, actually, I'm gonna add one more item, is a pair of tweezers. These help tremendously on getting wheels off plastic bases. So, for example, let's say I want to change these wheels, but I want to keep them fairly good. All I'm doing is wheel and paint. I'm not altering the stance. I'm not doing anything but changing the wheels. Okay? That way I don't have to do anything here. Everything will fit. So I hunt around. I find tires that will fit. So I have options. I have the same size, but they're the right width. So meaning the axles are already going to work out. All I got to do is take these out and put these in. Okay, these are pretty much the same. I don't know why I grabbed a different one, but either way, these will fit. They're the same diameter, so I'm not going to have to change too much. Now, the fronts may be a little bit wider, so I might have to look at that and decide whether I want to use these if I don't want to modify the casting. Now, it may work. We'll find out. The other option is I have these wheels. These are going to fit in the back. And the fronts will definitely fit because they're a smaller tire. So I can use this if I want to have like a little bit of a rake. The diameter is pretty close to the same. It might be a tad smaller, but width-wise, it'll fit. The problem with this casting is this is a lot wider than most. So you need a longer axle if you're not going to make them. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to push up with my thumb, my forefinger. I'm going to get my, actually, I can push it right off just like that. A lot of times you can also put this underneath and pry them off just like that. If you don't plan on using them ever again, because they do bend. Now you'll notice there are 3 tabs. 1, 2, 3, front and back. So usually you can open these up a little bit. And what that'll do is that'll allow you to snap in whatever you're going to use for a wheel. And then if you want, you can take a screwdriver or these and just pry them back down. Pretty simple. So you can put these in. See how they kind of just fall in? And it doesn't hurt if you break the tab. It's not the end of the world. Don't worry about it. A lot of times, I see how this one is a little snugger going in. I've got to bend this tab right here just a little bit. So if you break the tabs off, it's not the end of the world. Once you get these in place, you can put a little dab of glue in the center and it'll hold the axle because the wheels spin on the axle, not the axle spinning itself. So essentially that's what you got. Now remember, these tires were a little bit wider in the front than I wanted. So let's put this back together. It's hard doing stuff on camera. I don't know if anybody's ever said that or not, but there you go. Okay, so this works. So as you can see, this will give you a nice, dark look to it. Not crazy about it. I'm not a big fan of keeping things level. Any of my videos you see, I usually slam stuff to the ground or I have a decent sized rake. But anyways, that's how you would do that. This is pretty much just one for one, very basic, very simple. So the next one I could see is, let's try these. And the easy part about this is I'm not altering anything, so I can do this as many times as I want. Okay, so those are in there. Okay, so that gives me a little bit of a rake. I kind of like that. This would be something I'd be happy with going. It rolls good. It looks good. I'm happy with it. So that takes care of those. These are size for size wheels. But what do you do when your wheels don't fit width-wise, but you want them to, you still want to use them? So for example, for some reason, I happen to have these in my stash. The axles are gone. I had cut them I probably was going to use this on a custom project and never ended up using them. So size-wise, I'd be able to, these are pretty much the same size as the ones I just had on there. The fronts are a little bit wider, but not much. But I don't have any axles. So there's a few things I can do. So let's break into some of the other items that we're going to use. So this is K&S Precision Metals, stock number 501. It's 0.032, or for my fellows across the pond, 0.81 millimeters, music wire. This is the size of axles for Matchbox and Hot Wheels. Then you need a tube. Sometimes. This is where it gets a little complicated. I can go with a 3/32 tube, which is just styrene, It's a little larger, but not enough to make a difference. For a very, very, very precise fit, I've got, you can either use aluminum, which is 1/16 by 0.014, stock number 8100, or I use the copper more often than not, or the brass. That is 5125, also from K&S. So the advantage here, if you take a piece of this, this is where your side cutters come in. Got to make sure you actually hold it. Make sure you wear eye protection. Don't be an idiot like me. So if you look, this fits perfectly. Okay. So you could do a few different things. Predominantly what I've done in most of my videos is I've used this brass tubing. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll take this and I'll measure this. So I need one piece 17.4 millimeters, and I need one 14.7. What I do is I will cut this. Okay. Now, when you cut this, it's going to peen over the end a little bit. So you just got to kind of open it up with a knife, or you can actually use this once again, kind of stick it in and roll it around a little bit. I'll use a Dremel tool, but you can use whatever you want. I use a cutoff disc because then I can use it to also sand or grind down the edges. Now the problem you're going to run into, and it's not a huge problem, is it's used to a slot right here that's this wide. Now when you put this, it's going to be wider, so it's not going to sit all the way down. If you notice, you can see a gap here. Now, if you're trying to lower your vehicle, that's great. If not, you're going to have to get a file, or you can use your cutoff wheel again to kind of widen that hole a little bit. So not only the slot, but also a little bit here is going to have to be a little bit wider. So here, and then this right here. So that's up to you. Again, it all depends on the vehicle, what you're trying to accomplish. It's a good way to lower your vehicle. You know, if you can afford to go down that distance and it still looks good, then you can go for it. You just glue this in place, and I'll go over it in a second. You'll end up cutting two of these and sticking one in each side. And again, I will show you how to do that. So the other thing you can do is you can just use this axle. So there's multiple ways you could do this. Because I'm not putting it in a tube, you can crimp the ends, but this music wire is really, really hard to crimp. I have a pair of, I think they use it on fencing. I have one of these, and if you put this in the end, you can actually crimp it over, like so. Put it really, really hard. You got to make the noises too, otherwise it doesn't work. You might have to do it 1 or 2 times, depending upon the hole in the wheel itself. Sometimes they're a little bit bigger. So see how that kind of, it had a little bit of resistance, but it needed a little bit more. So sometimes you got to flatten it out a little bit more just to get the enough of a flat edge. I don't know if you can see that. So you can put this side in. There. So now you can see. Then pretty much what you do is you put the other one on, like so. You'll put this in. Make sure this is all the way. And then you take your cutters, cut it flush, leave just a little bit. take your wheel, spin it around, and then you'll crimp the other side. And again, sometimes you got to do it more than once. This stuff is really hard to work with, the piano wire. You got to get it just right. To me, this is kind of a pain in the neck. See how I made it? And it's just a little too long. It's better to be too long than too short. That's what she said. All right, so I come in here. You just take this, just cut a little bit more off, and then you do it again. Again, I always err on the side of caution, and it depends on how much, obviously, you put in here to crimp. If you go down here, obviously, you got a problem, so you just want to crimp maybe 1/8 of an inch, 3/16. It's going to sit inside the wheel a little bit, so it's not that big of a deal. Yeah, see, that would be perfect. So you just snap that in, and you're good to go. Again, you gotta, it's a lot of work. So that's one way of doing it. Now, these will spin in here. So another thing that you can do, instead of this, okay, green stuff. If you take a little bit of this, you don't need much. This right here is enough for 4 of them. It's not something that you're going to be sticking it in the hole just a little bit. And what that allows you to do is pretty much stick this right into your wheel. So you can leave your axle tube or your axle rod here, and then you can just slide your 2 wheels on. Which sometimes in your build, it all depends, you may have to do because of the way you have to assemble it. It just gives you another option. This also works well with axle tubes if you decide to go that route. Okay, so you got to mix it up really good till it's got a nice green color, which is why it's called green stuff. If you're colorblind, I don't know what to tell you. Ask for help. It's not super imperative, but this stuff will harden. So I'm just taking a very little. Right? Okay. I'm just going to put it right here. Even that's too much. You can probably take even less than that. Again, this is not a process that, you know, when it comes to wheels, I know some people make it look really easy. It's not that easy. I mean, it's not hard, but it's time consuming. When we do a video, it looks simple. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. I can't speak for other customizers, but I know doing the wheels is one of the more time-consuming parts of a build for me. So if you just stick that in there like that, make sure it's not sticking out too far on that end. Then you put this in, find your happy medium, and then leave it alone for a little while. It will harden up. Okay, make sure there's a little bit of a gap there so it doesn't try to stick itself to the frame or the base, and then that takes care of that. Pretty simple. Just another option. I don't know if you've ever thought of it. If you haven't, great. It just gives you a little bit more freedom. And what will happen is now the axle will spin, not the wheel. So as long as you're clear in here and there's nothing obstructing you, this will turn just like it would any other time. Again, once you get it set, don't touch it. You know, do it before you go to bed, come back in the morning, it'll be fine. So that's another option. Okay, so axle tubes. I'm going to just use this one because it's already out. Both ends are already kind of, I've used this piece a few times. So I'm going to cut this. Use my knife. Open up the hole. Okay, so now I got a hole. So now what I want to do is I'm going to measure 14.7, and I always keep a little fine point marker nearby. This doesn't have to be 100% accurate. I take into account the thickness of this, so I'll go on the outside. And again, you got to clean it up a little bit. And you use your knife, you open up the hole without poking yourself. Okay. And now you have yourself an axle tube. So you can do this multiple ways. You can do, like I said, with the green stuff and just also cut a piece of piano wire long enough for what you want. Or what you can do, in times I'll take an original, well, this one's bent, so another reason to try to not bend these. But for example, this one, I'll cut this in half, and I'll use the original axle cut in half, like so. And I'll do this. You always want to make sure you get it all the way in there. So obviously in this case, the axle that I cut, I have to be careful that it doesn't go past halfway, because when I put the other axle in, it's just going to push that one out. Now, I take that same piece of piano wire, I put it in here, I hold the very end, because this is brass and it does get warm if you're not fast enough. All I'm going to do is I'm going to make two, I guess you could do it with your knife too, a mark here and around here. What that's going to do, I mean, you could probably just do one in the middle, but I've just gotten in the habit of doing two just in case. All I'm going to do is make a notch, and that notch is where I'm going to put my glue to glue the axle in, so that the wheel just spins on the axle. So I hold it here. Now the advantage too of having the piano wire is I'm going from brass to steel. As soon as I hit the steel, it's going to spark. That's where I know I've gone far enough. So if you watch, you saw the spark. I got a little bit of a divot here. I flip it over. I put my thumb on that spot so I know I'm on the same side. Saw the sparks, roughly in the same spot. So I don't know if you can see that, but you can see the steel shaft underneath. That's all I need. I'm just going to use thin glue to put in there. So now, once I have this set in here to the height that I want, it all depends on you, what you're after. Either on top of everything, you know, obviously clip these tabs out. I'm either going to set this in there, I'm going to glue that, put a little bit of baking soda on it, and I'll either use the green stuff method and cut one piece the length I need on both sides. And that way the axle will still turn. Or I will go with this method, and before I assemble the interior, I will I'll stick these in and I'll put a piece of glue. And that's pretty much it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the camera for a second. I'm going to show you the finished result of me cutting the tabs, and I'm going to see what it's going to look like, because you got to look, again, there's a lot of trial and error on this, and I don't set anything in stone until I fit this like 5, 6, 7 times to make sure that the body and the chassis also, you can't forget about that, because the one thing you have to pay attention to is, for example, see how this goes on here like this? Actually, I'm going to put it up here so I know where it sits. That goes like that, and then that goes like that. So if you look, this right here is going to be a problem, because now my axle tube is going to be higher and wider. Okay, so I will take my Dremel tool and I will notch this out. You got to pay attention to that, because if you don't, when you go to assemble it, you're going to be kicking yourself. See how it sits like that? There's no way that this being raised up and wider is going to fit, so you have to trim it. If it was a regular casting or a car, you'll have the same problem in the back if it goes that far. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. So give me a second. I'm going to do this real quick, and I'm going to come back and show you, and hopefully it works. And if it doesn't work, I'll show you why it doesn't work. Okay, so what I ended up doing was using the axle tubes. I put them at the higher. I didn't groove it out. Right now I just have a piece of piano wire through, so I can still make adjustments if needed. Now, because I raised up the front just a little bit, which is lowering the chassis, okay, I ran into a problem. It fits well in here, but what doesn't fit is the chassis. So it scrapes here and here on these two pieces. So to solve that, just take a pair of side cutters now they're flat. So now, in a perfect world, which I don't know about you, but I don't live in one, but this should work. Again, this is I like to call it a time suck, but it's well worth the aggravation, instead of trying to do this when you're done, in case you have to make any modifications. So now it rolls, and I have a little bit of a stance. So at this point you can make a decision, and you can use the green stuff to put at the end of each wheel and just use a solid rod that goes all the way across, or you can use the individual axles and make 4 of those and stick them in. And then if you notice, when I glued my axles in, my axle tubes, excuse me, I made it so that the notches that I cut out are on the top. So now all I got to do is put a little bit of glue, a little bit of glue. Now the only thing I'll have to do on this one, because it's a truck, is I absolutely will have to notch this out. So I'll start by cutting this. Then I will take this, know that's not very precise, but it wouldn't be me if I didn't at least do that once in a video. So now I can see how this is going to sit. Get the wheels off so I'm not... There we go. Put this in here. And as usual, I wasn't even... Oh, there we go. So I didn't have to go as high as I did, but you're not going to see it anyways. So now it'll fit nice and smooth, and when I put this whole thing together, I won't have any obstructions that catch me off guard, causing a problem, and then I swear, and then I throw the truck, and then I have to repaint it because I threw the truck, and all that stuff. So essentially, that's pretty much it. There are obviously other wheels. There's other styles. This is just my method, not telling you to do it, but this is how I do it, and a little bit of my process of how I think about things as I'm doing it. Not only in my selection of my wheels, but the stance that I'm going to be looking for. Obviously, if I was going for a slammed all the way across, then these wheels aren't going to fit. I either have to radius this and grind out this, or cut it out completely. Step sides are a pain in the neck. This just happens to be a step side, but it would be a pretty decent time suck for a process. So in this case, I would, I knew what I wanted for a stance. Obviously, everybody has their own choices. Depends on your build, what you're after. And if you're going for a four-wheel drive look and you don't want to go crazy, you can actually just reverse this. Take these axles, take your Dremel tool, and just make a line across. Use a file it, because the width of this file is perfect, these little fingernail files. And just go across, mount it upside down, and this whole thing will be raised. So that's just another alternative. It's a freebie. So hopefully you got something out of this. I don't usually do these types of videos because they end up being really long, even though I say they're going to be short, which is probably the case in this one. I haven't edited it yet, but that's where we're at. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you on the next one.